Today I want to go over the recent Air India 171 crash of the Dreamliner, um, and some possible reasons for why it could have crashed given the footage and the evidence we have as of now. So this is a picture of the Dreamliner. It was Victor Tango Alpha November Bravo, and this is a 787-8 Dreamliner, so the shorter version of the Dreamliner. And I also want to cover a simulation on what could have caused the crash, and which shows and depicts the crash in a simulator. So I just want to go over the crash footage first.
We have more videos.
This is from Sky News.
Now this is more video.
If we look here closely, the flight takes off as usual, and then it starts to stall. And this stall eventually causes it to fall into the surrounding area. And this is highly likely due to loss of thrust. And one thing that's quite confusing here is that why the landing gear was still down, or why there was no attempt to push the nose further down to gain some velocity. And this is what I want to cover here. So if we go to the next slide here, this is a picture of the tail crash into a building. If we take a look here, we can see that the elevators were slightly pitched upwards here, which is hard to see given the damage. But this elevator shows that there was an attempt to recover the aircraft. However, given the loss of thrust, I don't think this was possible. And so the first thing we notice here is the angle of attack. And the angle of attack is a very high attack, so it's continuously trying to recover. And this is a picture of the plane on the way down. So now there's a question as to if the flaps were deployed or not. And if the flaps were not deployed, this would mean that the aircraft would need a higher speed to maintain its lift. And if it was not achieving the speed, it would fall, which could have been a plausible reason for the stall, as we saw in the video. However, in the next slide, we'll see that the flaps were deployed, and there was an attempt to recover, as seen by the elevator, because on this specific aircraft, the aircraft not only uses the elevator, but also the wing flex to sort of pitch itself up. One more thing to see here is that the landing gear of the aircraft is still deployed, regardless of the attempt to reduce the drag. And I think this is probably because the pilots were more focused on the immediate action, which is to pitch up the aircraft, and did not have time to look at measures to reducing drag or restarting the engines or solving this loss of thrust, especially because it occurred at such a low altitude, which gave them less time to react. As we can see here, this is a screenshot from PilotBlog's video showing the recovered debris of the wing. So here we can see that the flap was indeed deployed. And this is not possible to achieve with just the impact of the crash, as they're operated hydraulically. So these flaps were deployed knowingly by the pilots. So we cannot say that it was a zero flap configuration takeoff. One thing to notice here in this is that there's a little bit of there's a possibility that the hydraulics system failed, which could have caused the ram air turbine, a secondary turbine, to deploy on the plane. And right here, this is where it would deploy. A little fan would come out, and there were some reports of a turbine-like noise being heard. So this is highly plausible, but we cannot confirm this until further evidence has been released. Again, the landing gear is still deployed. Now I want to run a quick. I want to show the quick simulation of this. So here is a same Air India aircraft with the same weight configuration as the actual flight. This is the same variant, and here we have the same runway from Ahmedabad airport. We can see the airspeed slowly rising here, and according to reports, the plane went to the end of the runway and took off at 173 knots, which is quite high. So if we have a typical takeoff configuration here for thrust, we notice that as an aircraft approaches the end of the runway, we do get around exactly to 170 knots. which shows that the weight was around 500,000 or 220,000 kilograms. So as the plane takes off, we notice this. Here we go with the angle of attack, and we keep the landing gear extended. Now this is where we assume that the aircraft lost thrust. So if you hear closely, you can hear the aircraft losing the thrust here. So once it loses thrust, we can see that as we continue to pitch the plane up, the wings start to flex, and the plane starts to stall just like in the video. It starts to stall smoothly, and the wings flex more, and there's a crash. So what we see here is that in this configuration, even with the flaps of 5 degrees deployed, the wing is still, just like in the images, it still seems somewhat stable. So it's not like it's obvious that the flaps were deployed. However, I think this is exactly what happened. There was a loss of thrust, which caused the plane to immediately stall, and the mayday call probably happened sometime around this point, just when the thrust was lost. And yeah, so what I want to say is this is the flight history of the plane. A passenger on this flight, Air India 423, reported that there were some issues in the cabin of the Air India flight, including the AC is not working, the TV is not working, etc. And then this is the flight that crashed, AI-171. So this is the flight history. Of course, it's been through many destinations as well. And the aircraft itself is around a little bit more than a decade old, I believe. But in conclusion, based on the simulation and what we saw there, the issue was likely an issue with thrust or engine power. And this can happen due to many things, such as fuel contamination, wrong type of fuel used, or some sort of strike. And if it was a bird strike, I feel that we could see that in the video, which we don't see that. So I think it was some other issue or some maintenance or mechanical failure that caused the engines to fail, which made the pilots lose control of the thrust. And the strategic move here would have been to retract the landing gear. But if the ram air turbine or this secondary turbine was deployed, that would mean that there was a hydraulics failure. Same thing with the flaps. These flaps should not have been retracted at all, because we need to achieve the S speed. One more thing that was noticeable is that the full runway is used for takeoff, which is quite unusual. And we saw the recovery attempt was just a pitch up, because I believe the pilots assumed that they could regain thrust. And the max altitude reached was 625 feet, which is 400 feet above the ground, because Ahmedabad airport is around 200 feet of barometric altitude. So we can see that the thrust was lost immediately after takeoff. So based on the simulation and based on the evidence right now that we have right now, of course we can wait on the black box footage. It was due to loss of thrust. So my condolences go out to all the families of passengers on board. Of course, it's a very tragic event, and it's the first hull loss of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. So it's a very big event in aviation history. Very sad event. But yes, this is my explanation. I hope that this has helped you understand some of the possible reasons for this crash.